Hi, I'm Thalassa. My parents told me to pack a bag and go stay with Grandma. Said it was just for a while. What they didn't say was that my penthouse, the one I worked for my entire adult life, was being handed over to my sister. The golden one, the one who never paid rent a day in her life. They threw a party in it without telling me. They used my home to build her brand. They said I was overreacting, that I was unstable. But was I? Because what's worse, being cut out of your own story, or realizing they never saw you in it to begin with. It was a Thursday afternoon in late March. The rain had paused just long enough to let a weak sun stretch through the windows of my penthouse. I had just closed my laptop, the last video call of the day ending with my junior developer thanking me for covering her deadline. I stretched, ready to pour myself a glass of wine when my phone rang. It was my mother. Her voice was crisp, like always, and unusually polite. "We need to talk, Thalassa. Can you stop by the house this evening? It's just a small family update, nothing serious." She always said that, nothing serious. Usually before something that shifted my world in the worst ways. Still, I said yes. Out of habit. Out of hope, maybe. By 6, I was pulling into the familiar driveway of their suburban Tacoma home. The house looked the same, slightly too clean, with those tacky seasonal flags my mother insisted on. Callista's white SUV was already parked up front. I took a deep breath and walked in. The air inside was warm, but it didn't feel welcoming. My father was in his recliner, pretending to scroll on his phone. My mother appeared from the kitchen, wearing lipstick too dark for her complexion. Callista stood at the edge of the dining room, arms crossed and smiling like she'd just won a raffle. No hugs, no, "How have you been?" Just a perfunctory, "Come sit," from my mother, gesturing to the sofa. The coffee table had been cleared, unusual in itself. On top sat a pristine gift bag with gold trim and tissue paper that looked like it had been ironed. I almost laughed. This wasn't a birthday. My birthday was months away. My heart began to tighten. "We wanted to do this properly," my mother said, her smile too rehearsed. "This is from the family." I opened the envelope tucked inside the gift bag. At first, I thought it was a card. Instead, it was a notarized letter, a temporary usage transfer agreement. My name, my penthouse address, my signature, but one I hadn't yet signed. I flipped the page. Callista's name was listed as the interim occupant. Her address, my address. I blinked, trying to process. "What is this?" Callista chimed in, as if it were the most reasonable thing in the world. "You've done so well, Thalassa. This place, it's too big for just you. Mom and Dad thought, maybe for a little while I stabilize." "Stabilize?" I cut in. "You know," she shrugged. "Get back on my feet. You said you support me. This is support." My mother reached out to pat my hand. "It's temporary, just until she launches her women's nonprofit. That space would give her the presence she needs to build credibility." They were serious, dead serious. I tried to keep my voice even. "So, you expect me to move out of my own home, my name on the deed, and just hand it over?" My father finally looked up. "We've already spoken to the building's management. It's all being arranged. We just need your signature." I sat in stunned silence. "You'll stay at Grandma Marlowe's for now," my mother added, like it was just logistics. "She has that guest room, and she'd love the company." Callista beamed. "You can always come visit." I stared at the paper, at the people who raised me, and something snapped. Not loudly, but definitively. "You've already decided this," I said, standing. "This isn't a conversation. It's a briefing." "It's not a request," my mother confirmed, her tone sharp now. "It's already done." No one tried to stop me when I walked to the door. I didn't take much. Just my laptop, charger, a week's worth of clothes, and my duffel bag. I didn't say goodbye. I didn't cry. I booked a ride share on the curb while the living room behind me echoed with the clinks of dinner plates being set. The ride to Grandma's was silent, save for the occasional GPS voice. I stared out the window as the neighborhoods blurred, cleaner blocks turning to cracked sidewalks, painted fences giving way to chain link. By the time I arrived, the sun had given up completely. Her porch light flickered as I knocked. It took a moment for the door to open. She squinted, her nightgown hanging loosely on her frame. "Thalassa?" Yeah, I said softly. "They didn't call ahead?" She shook her head slowly, stepping aside. Inside, the house smelled like old cedar and Vicks. The wallpaper peeled in corners. The hallway bulb buzzed overhead. She motioned toward the back room. "The old sewing room still has a cot." I nodded, wheeling my suitcase inside. As I sat on the edge of the musty cot, staring at the floral wallpaper, I realized something. It wasn't the roof that was crumbling. It was the family I thought I still had. The first night at Grandma Marlowe's house felt more like exile than refuge. The air was thick with mothballs and forgotten things, the kind of smell that clung to old drapes and memories nobody wanted to unpack. She hadn't been told I was coming, so when I wheeled my suitcase inside, she blinked at me like I was a ghost who'd wandered into the wrong year. "Thalassa?" she asked, squinting in the dim hallway light. "Hi, Grandma. I'm staying here for a bit." She didn't ask why, just nodded slowly and turned. "You can take the back room. It's where I keep things, but there's a cot." The hallway creaked beneath her slippers as she shuffled ahead. I followed, dragging the suitcase past yellowing wallpaper and old photographs tilted just slightly askew. When she opened the door, I hesitated. It wasn't a guest room. It wasn't even a room meant to hold people anymore. Stacks of bins, plastic tubs filled with who knows what, an old fan with one broken blade, and a faded box labeled Callista High School stared back at me. There was a cot, folded up against the wall, and a small table with a lamp that didn't work. The only window was cloudy, coated with grime and spiderwebs that looked like they'd been there since the Clinton administration. "I'll leave you to it," Grandma said, already halfway down the hallway. I unfolded the cot and set my duffel bag beside it. There was no closet, just a few hooks nailed to the back of the door. I hung my jacket and sat on the edge of the mattress, which groaned like it remembered better days. Lying back, staring at the ceiling, I could hear the faint drip of a pipe somewhere in the house. Grandma had warned not to flush too fast or too often. "The plumbing's moody," she said. But what stuck with me wasn't the pipe. It was how this room, this storage room, wasn't cleaned or prepared for anyone. I hadn't been expected. I'd been stored. Morning came through blinds that only half closed, thin rays cutting through dust motes that danced like they'd never been disturbed. My neck ached, my lower back protested. I sat up and rubbed my eyes. That's when I saw it. A photo on the wall. Callista, age 16, crown on her head, homecoming queen, smiling like the world had been made for her, and in a way it had. Below it sat a mug on the table, pale yellow with a chipped handle. "World's best sister." I stared at it. I remembered that mug. It was part of a set, a gag gift from our aunt. Mine had said, "World's okayest sister." I didn't think it was funny back then either. Grandma knocked lightly on the door. "You want toast?" "Sure," I answered. She peeked in, then paused. "Callie, you—" "I'm Thalassa," I corrected. "Oh," she murmured. "Of course, honey. My mistake." It stung more than it should have. I followed her to the kitchen, but my appetite had already walked out the door. I sipped weak coffee and stared at the peeling linoleum, wondering how fast a life can shift without you noticing the ground disappear. Later that day, my phone buzzed. "Hi, Ms. Boone. This is Mark from the Cascade HOA. Just confirming your forwarding address request. We'll begin redirecting mail starting Friday." I stood frozen. I didn't submit a forwarding request. Awkward pause. "It came from a registered secondary contact, so we assumed—" "Who's listed?" "Callista Dorn." "Of course." I called the property management office, barely breathing through the hold music. When I finally reached someone, the confirmation came without hesitation. "Yes, Ms. Dorn is the secondary contact. Our records show she's pending as primary occupant, awaiting your final signature for transfer. My fingers tingled. My stomach flipped. The dinner? 2 weeks ago, that envelope my mother handed me. Just a logistics form, she'd said. For the HOA, something about visitor access. I signed it. I signed my own erasure. I dialed my mom. No answer. I texted. No reply. Finally, she responded an hour later with a single line. It's all for the best, dear. Don't stress yourself. We'll figure it out as a family. Family. That word. That knife wrapped in a hug. I sat at Grandma's kitchen table and opened a fresh notebook. I began to write. The date, the time, the phone calls, what was said, what wasn't. I wrote like someone building a case. Because maybe I was. If they're willing to rewrite the paperwork, what else have they rewritten about me? Rain tapped a restless rhythm on the tin roof that morning, like it was trying to remind the house of all the stories it used to hold. The air inside still smelled like menthol rub and lemon polish, same as it did when I was 12. I shuffled into the kitchen, still wearing yesterday's hoodie, searching for something warm to sip. The mug I reached for stopped me cold. It was mine, pale blue with a tiny chip on the lip. I'd painted it in a 4th grade class and given it to Grandma. On the side in black paint, barely legible now, it read, Thalassa's Tea Time. She'd kept it all this time, except it was covered in dust, tucked behind a lineup of novelty mugs that said things like Callista's Kitchen Queen and Homecoming 98. I washed it silently and made a weak cup of tea, letting the steam rise and sting my eyes. Grandma wasn't up yet, so I wandered the hallway, looking for an extra blanket. The nights in that house had a way of cutting through you, no matter how many layers you wore. I opened a closet in the back hallway, one I hadn't touched since high school, and was hit with a familiar scent. Paper, mildew, something else. Memory. The shelves were lined with board games no one played anymore, a coat box with the name Harold written in faded Sharpie, and a cardboard container shoved behind an old humidifier. The side read, Miss Korstreit, back room. I sat cross-legged on the floor and lifted the lid. Inside were fragments of a life no one talked about, old tax papers, postcards from someone named Elaine I couldn't place, a dried corsage from a dance I didn't attend. And then, under a folder marked Medical 2013, I saw it. An envelope with my name, in my dad's handwriting. The air thickened. I stared at it for a long time before opening it. It was dated 10 years ago. Postmarked, but never mailed. The ink had bled a little, but the words were clear. He wrote about the surgery I'd helped him through, how I stayed by his side for days while Callista couldn't take the hospital smell. He wrote that he noticed how I kept the house running while Mom disappeared into church projects, and Callista chased internships she never finished. You've always carried more than they've seen, he wrote. I should have said this to your face. I see you. I saw you then, and I wish I'd spoken louder. The last line broke something in me. One day, I hope you get to live in a house where your name is on everything and no one doubts you earned it. The paper trembled in my hand. Not from age. From me. That afternoon, while folding laundry in the living room, Grandma suddenly said, Do you remember that Thanksgiving you cooked everything at 14? I glanced up, surprised. Yeah, nobody else showed up to help. You stayed to clean too, she said softly, folding a towel like it held glass. That's when I knew you'd survive longer than any of them. It was the first time someone in my family ever validated not just what I'd done, but who I was while doing it. No pity, no theatrics, just a quiet truth shared across a pile of dish towels. That night, I sat at the little desk in the storage room and opened a fresh journal. I started with a list. Every time I'd been forgotten, every time I'd stayed late, every time I'd paid and been erased, not to stew in it, not to weaponize it, just to remember what they forgot I never forgot. And then I added new pages. Memories they didn't steal. Moments they couldn't twist. like how I used to read on the roof of the old shed behind our house, how I bought my first laptop with tutoring money, how the first dinner in my penthouse had been salmon, cooked with trembling hands, because I couldn't believe I'd made it. I matched each event with how it felt, not how they told it. They forgot I remember. But now, I'm going to write it down. And this time, it stays mine. It started like most things these days, with a photo I wasn't supposed to see. I was lying on the cot in Grandma Marlowe's back room, scrolling through my phone in the dark. I wasn't looking for anything, just killing time, distracting myself from the ceiling's slow leak and the sense that every day I spent there made me more invisible. That's when I saw it. My cousin Stephanie had posted a selfie, lips glossy, hand on hip, her caption reading, "Big love to the most inspiring woman I know. Community queen." The tagged location made my stomach turn. It was my penthouse. I sat up so fast, I knocked over the mug on the side table. I stared at the screen, confused at first. Maybe it was old. Maybe someone had made a mistake. Then I swiped to the next photo. Callista stood by the kitchen island, holding a glass of champagne. Behind her were 3 women I didn't recognize, and a man in a blazer that looked expensive enough to pay off my last student loan. The walls, the marble, the lighting, my lighting, confirmed it. They were partying in my home. I wasn't invited. I wasn't even notified. My name was still on the deed. Unless, of course, they'd found a way to alter that too. I kept scrolling, unable to stop. The images got worse. My framed sketch of Pike Place Market, gone, replaced with an oversized canvas of soft pastels and the phrase, "her space, her voice." There were flyers tacked to the hallway wall announcing a new initiative. Building futures, from family to foundation. And then the video clip. Callista standing in the living room, speaking to a camera with the confidence of someone who'd never heard the word no. "This space," she said, smiling wide, "was given to me by my family so I could build something bigger than myself. So many women are overlooked, forgotten, minimized. This is my way of turning that cycle around." My teeth clenched, my jaw hurt. I felt like I'd been slapped, no, replaced. I called the building manager the next morning, polite, direct. "I wasn't informed of an event being held at my unit," I said. The voice on the other end didn't miss a beat. "Ms. Boone, our records show that permission was filed last month, by your parents. The leaseholder designation lists Ms. Callista Dorn as the new occupant pending final verification." I didn't even bother replying. I hung up and stared at the blank wall across from Grandma's cluttered bookshelf. They hadn't just taken the apartment, they'd rebranded me out of it. The narrative now painted me as the privileged one, selfish, withholding space that could be used for greater good. It was a well-constructed image, charity mixed with family legacy, and it silenced any protest I might offer by making me look like the villain. I spent the afternoon in the backyard pacing, my boots pressed into the dead grass. The air smelled like damp wood and reheated spaghetti from Grandma's microwave. I imagined showing up at the penthouse, crashing through the door and demanding everyone leave. I imagined dragging Callista out by her perfect curls. But I didn't move. I opened my email and typed out a message to my mother. Deleted it. Tried again. Deleted that one too. I wrote to Callista. Then to Dad. None of them got sent. I was done explaining myself to people who had already decided who I was. Instead, I opened a new folder on my laptop and titled it Unedited. I saved every photo from Stephanie's post, screenshotted every caption, logged every change to the penthouse layout I could identify from the background of each image. I wrote everything I knew, the date I bought the unit, the first furniture delivery receipt, the design consultant's invoice. I included the note I found in the storage room, the voice message from the HOA, the signatures I'd never given. It wasn't about revenge, not yet. It was about documentation, because if they could rewrite the truth about where I lived, what else were they willing to revise? They celebrated above me, sipping my wine, posing beside my windows. But soon, they'd see who'd actually built that home. It was a Wednesday when the article popped up on my LinkedIn feed, shared by an old coworker I hadn't spoken to since I left my first job in Bellevue. Her caption read, "Love seeing women lift women. What a story!" I almost scrolled past it. Almost. The article's title was, "How One Woman Turned Luxury into Legacy." The woman was Callista. There she stood, perfectly lit against the backdrop of my penthouse balcony. My furniture, rearranged. My lighting scheme, now painted in soft tones of generosity and reinvention. My personal aesthetic, cropped and filtered until it no longer felt like mine. The layout? It was my original floor plan, the one I spent weeks designing with a consultant. Only now, it was branded Callista's Wellness Space for Women in Transition. The tagline was, "What did it? Proof that when women support each other, transformation happens." Support each other? She hadn't even texted me since I was shoved out of that apartment. I didn't cry. I didn't comment. I just saved the article to a folder I quietly titled Receipts. That night, I muted the family group chat. No one noticed. The next morning, I declined a dinner invite from my aunt and deleted my RSVP to an upcoming birthday brunch. No explanations, no excuses. I was done participating in the image they'd built around Callista's reinvention, an image funded by my silence and displacement. Instead, I began organizing files. Not photos for nostalgia, but digital documents with timestamps. The lease, the transaction history, the HOA call log. I wasn't hoarding these things out of paranoia. I was building a timeline, because if they could craft a narrative that erased me, then I needed to build one that couldn't be erased. 2 days later, my mother and Callista showed up unannounced at Grandma Marlowe's house. It was just before dinner. I was chopping onions, lost in the mindless rhythm, when the doorbell rang. Grandma let them in with her usual smile, unaware of the storm behind their smiles. "We were in the neighborhood," my mom said, slipping off her gloves like she owned the air in the room. "Thought we'd stop by." Callista leaned against the fridge like it was hers too. They sat. I stayed standing. "We were talking," my mother began, "about the upstairs bathroom. The pipes are rusted and the tile is moldy. It really could use remodeling. We thought, since you're staying here?" I blinked. "You want me to pay for renovations?" "Well," she said, smoothing her skirt, "it's the least you could do while staying here rent-free." There it was. The line. I wiped my hands slowly on a dish towel, then looked straight at her. "I won't fund a place that treats me like a ghost." Silence. Even Grandma stopped stirring her pot. Callista scoffed. "God, you're so bitter. No one owes you anything, Thalassa. You act like you're the only person who's ever worked hard." I didn't answer. I didn't cry. I simply folded the towel, placed it beside the sink, and walked out of the room mid-sentence. No apology, no performance, just movement. I stood in the backyard, letting the cold air bite through my sleeves. It was the first time I said no without flinching. The first time I walked away without guilt crawling up my spine. For most of my life, no had felt like betrayal, like a door slamming shut between me and whatever fragile connection I was trying to hold together. But now it felt like oxygen. I realized I had been paying, financially, emotionally, spiritually, for everyone else's comfort. I had financed their fantasy. I had cleaned up behind their messes, absorbed their tantrums, and made excuses for their mediocrity. This was the first time I wouldn't. Later that night, I opened my laptop and created a new folder called Truth Archive. The cover image was a screenshot. On the left, Callista standing on my balcony in that article. On the right, a photo of me from move-in day, holding a set of keys with tears in my eyes. I opened a blank document and typed the first line. You don't get to rewrite the origin story of something you never built. The envelope was thick, heavier than the usual junk mail that ended up at Grandma Marlowe's. I found it waiting by the back door, mixed in with local church newsletters and a catalog for orthopedic shoes. It was certified. Return address, Cascade View Building Management. My fingers knew before my mind did. Inside was a letter from the HOA. Polite, corporate, cold. Notification of final occupancy rights transfer. Callista Dorn to be listed as primary occupant effective immediately, per your signed agreement dated last month. I read it again. And again. A signed agreement? There was no such thing. I never signed anything like that. The only document I vaguely remembered was an envelope my mother handed me during dinner a few weeks ago. "It's just logistics, dear. Something the HOA sent," she'd said, placing it next to my wine glass while Callista pretended not to listen. I was distracted, tired. I didn't read the fine print. I trusted. That was my mistake. I had signed it, but not what I thought I signed. I stood in the middle of Grandma's hallway, the scent of Vicks and bleach thick in the air, clutching legal confirmation that I had been evicted, by my own hand, holding their pen. I sat on the cot in the storage room, paper in my lap. The shadows from the blinds fell across the text like prison bars. My ears rang. By sunset, I had called Jessica. Jessica and I met at a conference years ago. She was sharp in a way that made people nervous, and I knew if anyone could help, it was her. "Sounds like constructive fraud," she said, voice steady. "Maybe coercion. If they presented the document under false pretenses, you didn't consent in full awareness." I emailed her everything I had. Photos, emails, timeline logs. "Send a cease and desist first," she advised. "Make it cold, make it formal, no emotion." That night, I drafted the letter. To Callista Dorn, Vera Dorn, Everett Dorn. Subject: unauthorized occupancy and misrepresentation. This notice serves as formal objection to the transfer of residence at Cascade View to any party other than the undersigned. Supporting documentation of misrepresentation is attached. Any continued use of the property without legal authorization will be pursued through formal litigation. It took me hours to get the tone right. I reread it 5 times, slept on it, woke up, read it again, hit send. Then I waited. The first call came from my father. "You didn't have to drag this outside the family," he said, voice tight. "We were trying to handle things maturely." "You forged legal transfer papers," I said flatly. "That's not mature, that's criminal." He started to reply, but I hung up. Callista's voicemail came next. "Legal threats? Seriously, Thalassa? You've always been so dramatic. This is just like you, making a scene because you can't stand not being the center of attention." I didn't respond. I saved the message and added it to the folder labeled Legal Defense. They weren't hurt. They were scared. And that realization shifted something deep inside me. I'd spent my entire life fearing the day my family would cut me off. Now I was realizing, they never held me to begin with. They held access, guilt, expectations, but not me. I printed out every document, every email, every screenshot. I placed them in a fireproof file, labeled in bold Sharpie, in case they push further. Then I sat back in the quiet and watched the shadows shift across the carpet. I wasn't waiting for another call. I was preparing for the next one. This time, my name goes on every page, and every page stays mine. 3 days after I sent the cease and desist, I saw my penthouse on the morning news. I was halfway through my toast, Grandma humming in the kitchen behind me, when the segment aired on the small TV she kept perched on top of the fridge. The anchor's voice was chipper, like she was reading the weather. Local entrepreneur Callista Dorn is changing the game in Seattle real estate with her new community initiative, turning luxury living into purpose-driven space. And there she was, Callista, in my penthouse. The skyline behind her, framed by the floor-to-ceiling windows I'd paid for, designed around, obsessed over for months. She looked polished, poised, and just the right amount of humble. "It was gifted to me," she told the camera. "A chance to repurpose abundance for those who've been overlooked. My family believed in this dream." They cut 2 before and after shots. Before, my original decor. Before they stripped it. After. Still my furniture, repainted, rearranged, rebranded. I didn't move. My fork hovered midair. My stomach burned with something colder than fury. That afternoon, I got an alert from my bank. Fraud detection had flagged a request for asset verification. Someone had attempted to list the penthouse as collateral for a short-term business loan under Callista's name. I called the bank immediately, asked them to freeze everything linked to the property. The representative was calm, professional. Too calm. This wasn't their first call like this, but it was mine. By evening, I'd locked every financial tie to that unit and emailed my lawyer. Again. And just when I thought I'd hit emotional capacity for the day, I got an email. From Trevor. Subject: You don't deserve this. I almost didn't open it. Trevor was Callista's ex, the kind that hung around too long after the breakup and knew too much. He was slick, charming, and just messy enough to make everyone uncomfortable at family barbecues. But I opened it anyway. Thalassa, I know I'm not your favorite person. You have every reason not to trust me. But I can't keep quiet anymore. What they're doing to you, it's not just unfair, it's calculated. He continued. She said you wouldn't fight back, that you were too logical, too isolated. That made you predictable. Her words, not mine. At the bottom of the email was an attachment, an audio file, a recorded argument, apparently one of many. I clicked play. Callista's voice was unmistakable, clear, confident, sharp. She'll disappear, Trevor. She always does. Then I win. It's just a matter of time. My hand didn't shake. My eyes didn't well up. I just sat back and let it wash over me. 3 times I replayed it. Each time, the fog lifted a little more. The truth wasn't just ugly, it was premeditated. I saved the file and dropped it into my truth archive. Then I opened a blank document and began drafting a statement, not to be posted yet, but ready. Not to spark a war, but to correct the record. I wrote slowly, deliberately. This space was not gifted. It was built, paid for, earned, and stolen through charm, coercion, and family complicity. This is not about revenge. This is about restoring a name to what it built. They chose the spotlight. I'll choose the truth. The email came in with the same disingenuous sweetness I'd come to expect from my mother. Subject line: Let's put the past aside and talk like adults. I didn't reply. Instead, I clicked open the calendar invite she attached. 6 p.m., Saturday, at their house. Family reconciliation dinner. No mention of the penthouse, the forged signature, or the cease and desist they'd all pretended to ignore. Just that thin coating of civility people, like my mother, used like shellac over rotting wood. I went anyway. Not because I believed in reconciliation, but because it was time. When I pulled into their driveway, the first thing I noticed was how everything looked too perfect. Lawn clipped, curtains drawn just enough to look homey, the scent of pot roast already leaking from the cracks in the windows. This wasn't dinner, it was theater. Inside, the table was set like a spread for a holiday magazine. Matching napkins, polished silver, candles lit, though it was barely evening. And there she was, Callista, already seated, holding a glass of white wine like it was a prop, smile rehearsed down to the millimeter. I took my seat across from my mother, one uncle on either side of me. No, hello, no, how have you been? Just tight nods and stifled tension, pretending to be polite. We made it through salad in near silence. Then, over the clink of a second round of drinks, Callista stood. I want to begin by saying none of this has been easy, she started, the tone soft but firm. We've all made mistakes, and I think what matters most now is finding a way forward, together. That was the moment. I reached into my bag, pulled out my phone, and without a word, tapped play. Her voice filled the room, clear, confident, unmistakably hers. She'll disappear, Trevor. She always does. Then I win. It's just a matter of time. A fork dropped. Glassware stilled. The room froze in time. My father blinked hard, as if rewinding reality. My mother's lips parted slightly, but no sound came out. Callista didn't speak. She didn't have to. The room had heard her speak already. I let the silence linger. Let it stretch long enough to become uncomfortable. Then Uncle Martin did something no one expected. He cleared his throat and said, "I've watched this happen since they were kids." Everyone turned. He continued, slowly, deliberately. "The excuses, the manipulation, the way you all make her seem like she's the one causing trouble, when really she's just trying to hold her place in a family that never respected her place to begin with. No more." It wasn't a shout. It wasn't dramatic, but it cracked the dam. My cousin Stephanie set down her fork. Aunt Denise shifted in her chair. My father leaned back, as if the weight of his silence had finally caught up with him. No one rushed to defend Callista. Not this time. I stood, slid my phone back into my purse, and reached for my coat. "I didn't come here to argue," I said quietly. "I came here to put this down, for good." My mother reached out but stopped short. "Thalassa!" But I was already walking to the door. No one followed. No one called after me. I stepped into the night air, cool and still. The sky was clear, stars emerging like small truths, finally allowed to shine. If truth was a weapon, then silence was my shield. For 3 days, nothing happened. No calls, no texts, not even a passive-aggressive email from my mother. The silence was so complete, it felt strategic. I should have felt relief, but instead, I felt like I was standing in the eye of a storm that had simply stopped spinning, waiting for the next wind to pick up. Grandma noticed. She didn't say anything, but she brought me tea more than usual and turned off the news when I walked in. I appreciated it. Quiet gestures are how some people say, "I see you," without ever speaking the words. I tried to work. I edited proposals, submitted invoices, responded to client questions with my usual polish. But underneath it all was a constant buzz, like my nervous system hadn't received the memo that the dinner war had ended. Or maybe it knew better than I did that it hadn't. Then, on a quiet Thursday morning, I opened Facebook and found the post. It was from Vera, a soft focus photo of her sitting at the kitchen table, clutching a cup of tea and looking off into the distance, captioned, "Being a mother means letting go, even when it breaks your heart." The comment section read like a coordinated smear campaign. She was always dramatic. I remember her throwing tantrums as a teen. Some people never learn gratitude. Screenshots flooded my inbox, some from sympathetic cousins, others from acquaintances, unsure what to make of it. One anonymous account even posted a clipped video of the dinner. Edited. Of course. The part where Callista's voice confessed her strategy? Gone. In its place, my face, stone cold, then standing and walking out. To anyone unfamiliar, it looked like I'd stormed off in a fit of self-righteous anger. Later that day, I got an envelope from a law office. Inside, a formal statement from my parents' attorney, expressing concern over Thalassa Boone's recent behavior, including emotional volatility, erratic decision-making, and financial instability. They wanted temporary guardianship over my financial interests. Guardianship. I sat on the edge of Grandma's porch, letter in hand, legs shaking, but not from shock. From clarity. From the understanding that this wasn't just about a penthouse or pride. They were rewriting me. Again. That evening, I got a call from Trevor. I hesitated, then answered. His voice was quieter than usual. "Hey, I saw the post. The legal thing." I said nothing. "I didn't know it'd get this far," he continued. "But you should know. I wasn't just with Callista. Not only her. There was overlap." My silence stretched. He continued. "She used to say, well, that you were useful, until you weren't. That if she pushed enough, you'd break, and she could frame it like a breakdown." There was a pause. "I have a call recorded. One night, she said, 'We just have to wait for her to spiral. Then no one will believe her.'" My chest tightened. But I wasn't surprised, not anymore. "Send it to me," I said. He did. I added it to the Truth Archive, next to the bank alert, the forged signature, the dinner recording. By now, it had become more than a folder. It was a fortress. I forwarded it all to Jessica. The next morning, we filed a counterclaim: defamation, fraudulent guardianship attempt, harassment. She moved fast, methodical. I just provided the receipts. I didn't post anything online. I didn't send warning texts. I simply let the facts gather mass. At the bottom of our legal statement, Jessica had written, "The narrative being circulated by the opposing parties is not only unsubstantiated, but deliberately false and legally actionable." I printed that line out and pinned it above my desk. They wrote me out of the family. So I rewrote the narrative in the language they fear. Documented truth. I didn't expect the call. Not from a journalist, not from someone who had every reason to stay quiet. But she introduced herself plainly, first name only, voice neutral and brisk. She said she'd received a batch of documents that directly contradicted the original segment they'd aired on Callista's Community Initiative. Deed records, transaction logs, screenshots. They were sent anonymously, she said, but they raise real questions. I need to verify. Is this your legal signature on the original property deed? Yes, I answered. And that was all it took. The tide had shifted. 2 days later, the follow-up segment ran. Not a hit piece, not dramatic, but quiet and clear. A correction. The property in question, the anchor said, was legally owned by Thalassa Boone. Records show the transfer was disputed and remains under legal review. They didn't use Callista's name. They didn't have to. The comments spoke louder than the anchors ever could. She lied. Why didn't anyone fact-check this? Typical influencer energy. Take credit for what you didn't build. And just like that, her carefully painted image began to peel. People untagged themselves from old posts. Her donors fell silent. Comments were limited. Stories vanished from her profile. I watched it unfold from the kitchen, my laptop propped against a stack of old bills, toast untouched on my plate. I didn't feel joy, just stillness, like I'd finally stepped out of a room filled with noise I didn't realize had been there so long. That night, Grandma shuffled into the hallway and found me on the couch. She didn't speak at first, just sat beside me, hands folded in her lap. "I'm sorry," she said softly. "I let them turn this house into your cage." I looked at her. She wasn't crying. Her voice didn't shake. It was just truth, plain and overdue. "I didn't see it all," she continued, "but I saw how you stopped laughing. I noticed you stopped playing the piano. I thought it was growing up, but it was them." I took a breath. "You weren't the only one who stayed quiet, but you're the first one who broke it." She squeezed my hand, and that was enough. The next morning, my phone buzzed. "Vera." I let it ring, then ring again. Eventually, I read the voicemail transcript. "This is going too far. You've embarrassed the family." I didn't reply. Later that afternoon, Everett sent a text. "I didn't know it would go this far." Delete. I didn't have room for half remorse. 2 days later, I returned to the penthouse. No suitcase, no moving boxes. Just my keys and a small package tucked under my arm. I walked the hall, nodded at the concierge, who suddenly remembered my name again, and stepped into the apartment that still bore my scent in the walls. It looked the same. Callista hadn't changed everything. Some of my furniture remained. Sofas she hadn't bothered to replace. Art she couldn't fake. I walked straight to the door and unscrewed the brushed metal nameplate that read Dorn, tossed it into a drawer. Then I opened the box I brought with me. A new plate. Boone built. Not gifted. I screwed it in slowly, each turn like reclaiming a syllable of my name. I didn't cry. I didn't post about it. I simply stood there for a moment and let the truth settle into the silence. Truth doesn't scream. It stands, quietly, until it's undeniable. It was late, but I was still awake. The apartment was quiet, the kind of quiet you feel in your bones. I had just turned off the hallway light and was halfway through pouring water into the kettle when my phone rang. Unknown number, but I knew. I let it ring once, twice. By the third, I picked up. "Thalassa," she said. Vera's voice wasn't sharp like it usually was. It wasn't angry. It was soft, worn, almost empty. "We were just trying to do what was best for everyone." She said it like it was a favor, like what they'd done to me was some noble sacrifice made for a greater good. I didn't respond. I leaned against the counter and let the silence speak instead. "You need to understand," she continued. "We didn't mean for things to get so messy. But if you go through with all this legal noise, if you keep dragging it out, you can't expect to come back. Not to the family, not ever." And that was it. No apology, no regret, just conditions. I hung up, not in anger, just because I was done. If belonging means being erased, then I choose absence. The next morning, I met Jessica at our usual cafe. She wore that look she always wore when something heavy sat under her tone, professional but personal. "You okay?" she asked as we sat across from each other. "I'm more okay than I thought I'd be," I said honestly. I thought hearing from her again would undo me, but it didn't. It just confirmed what I already knew. Jessica nodded. "There's power in not needing the apology anymore." I stirred my tea and smiled, not because I was happy, but because I finally understood the kind of strength that didn't require an audience. That afternoon, I took a walk. It was the first warm day in weeks. I wandered to the bluff that overlooked the bay, a spot I hadn't visited in years. I used to come here in my 20s, back when I was building my life in spreadsheets and coffee spoons, sketching futures in notebooks with bent corners. I sat on a bench with a view of the water and pulled out my journal. I wrote one sentence. "This piece cost me everything I thought I needed." And then I closed the book and let the wind move through the trees above me. There was grief, yes, but there was also grace. And they coexisted without war. I didn't need to force one out to make room for the other. Later that night, I sat in my apartment, the only light coming from the small lamp by the reading chair. I opened the voice memo app on my phone and pressed record. "This one's just for me," I whispered. I didn't plan what to say. I just let it come. I used to think silence meant abandonment, that when people stopped talking, it was because they didn't care. But now I know better. Silence can be a sanctuary, a decision, a choice to no longer give space to what hurts. I paused, then smiled. Some ties aren't severed. They're shed, like skin that doesn't fit anymore. The light in the hallway flickered when I turned the key. Not out of malfunction, but as if the space remembered me, hesitated for a beat, then welcomed me back. The penthouse was quiet. Still, it hadn't been touched since the court order was finalized. No shoes in the entryway, no floral scent that wasn't mine. Just the lemon polish I used to wipe down the counter every Sunday morning. I didn't come back to move in. I came back to reclaim it on my terms. I moved through each room without touching a thing. My footsteps padded across hardwood floors I'd picked out myself. The windows were smudged, but the view beyond them hadn't changed. The skyline of Seattle stretched wide, framed by twilight, distant ferry boats blinking against the water. I stood in the doorway of what used to be my office and looked at the bare wall where I used to hang my father's letter. The one I'd found in a dusty box, long before any of this spiraled. The silence in the room wasn't hollow anymore. It was full of memory. I returned to the front door, pulled a small brass plate from my tote, and held it in my palm for a moment, before crouching to the doorframe. I unscrewed the one Callista had installed, the one that bore her last name, the one that tried to rewrite my story, and replaced it. Thalassa Boone, sole owner. No fanfare, no applause. Just the quiet sound of metal threading into wood. I stood, exhaled, and felt something let go inside me. Then I walked to the hallway console table, opened the bottom drawer, and pulled out a small envelope. Inside was the original deed. My signature, my name, the date. I slipped the envelope under a framed photo that still sat on the bookshelf, one of the family, taken years ago, when pretending was still enough to hold us together. I didn't toss it. I didn't burn it. I simply slid the photo from its frame and replaced it with a landscape I had drawn in college, an abstract shoreline, colored in quiet shades of blue and green. I didn't need to win, I whispered aloud. I just needed to be left alone. As I locked the door behind me, my phone buzzed. Stephanie. Her message was short. You gave the rest of us permission to walk away. Thank you. I stared at the screen for a moment before turning it face down. Minutes later, another message came through. From Jessica. It's finalized. Permanently. No one can ever challenge your name again. I didn't reply. I was already gone. My bag was packed, my car waiting in the garage. I hadn't told anyone where I was headed, not because I was running, but because I didn't need witnesses for the life I was stepping into. I drove with the windows down, the city shrinking behind me. I passed the streets I used to navigate by habit, coffee shops, bookstores, that one boutique I used to buy gifts from when I still believed birthdays fixed things. The skyline grew small in the rearview mirror. And still, I didn't cry, because leaving isn't always an escape. Sometimes it's a decision to stop begging to stay. Some inherit homes, others build them, and some, like me, survive them, then build better ones somewhere else. That was never just a penthouse. It was proof. Now I carry that proof inside. Some stories don't end with applause. They end with quiet decisions made in silence, far from the noise of others' expectations. If there's anything my journey has taught me, it's this. Peace isn't given. It's built, piece by piece, with truth, boundaries, and the courage to stop explaining yourself to people who are committed to misunderstanding you. You don't owe your sanity to anyone who weaponizes your loyalty. You don't have to remain in a room just because you were born in it. And sometimes, walking away doesn't mean defeat. It means self-respect. For anyone watching who's ever been called too much, too sensitive, or selfish for simply protecting your space, know that you're not alone. Your clarity is not cruelty. Your no is not a betrayal. Your voice, however quiet, still counts. Now I want to hear from you. Have you ever had to stand up to your own family to protect your peace? What did that moment feel like? If this story resonated with you, drop a 1 in the comments or let me know where you're tuning in from. If you didn't connect with it, that's okay too. Tell me why. What would you have done differently? And if you want more real stories like this, ones that go beneath the surface and speak to the heart of who we are, make sure to subscribe to this channel. Every story we share here is an invitation to reflect, to relate, and sometimes, to finally let go. I'll see you in the next one.